Esther. This is a wonderful true story of a young woman who loved the Lord and how God used her to save the Jewish people from destruction. Here are the main characters in the story. On the left is Esther and her uncle Mordecai. Next is the king and a powerful man called Haman. The Bible opens this story of Esther with a feast hosted by the ruler of the Medes and Persians, King Ahasuerus. It was attended by all the important people in his vast empire. During the feast, the king decided to call his wife to entertain the guests, so he sent a servant to fetch her. The queen refused to attend. The king was furious at his snub. "What should I do with my wife, who refused to obey me?" he fumed to his wise men. "Well," they said, "if you do not punish her, all the women in this land will copy her." They suggested that the king made an example of the queen by replacing her. The king liked this idea. A royal proclamation was made throughout the kingdom of Persia, calling for all suitable young women to apply for the position of queen. One of the king's subjects was a man called Mordecai. He was a Jew who lived near the palace. Mordecai was the uncle of a beautiful young woman called Esther. He was her guardian and looked after her. When Mordecai heard the king was looking for a new queen, he suggested that Esther apply. She agreed to try. Esther went to the palace and joined the other beautiful women. A whole year passed as the women were given beauty treatments and perfumes in preparation. Then one by one they went to see the king. At last it was Esther's turn. As soon as the king saw Esther, he fell in love with her. He liked Esther more than all of the other women hoping to become queen. The king announced that Esther should be crowned and become the new queen of Persia. Soon after Esther became queen, Mordecai heard about a plot to kill the king. 2 men were involved. Mordecai told Esther about the plot, and Esther reported them to the king. The king was very angry. He had them both arrested and put on trial. They were both found guilty. The king sentenced them both to death. Haman and Esther had saved the king's life, and the king's scribes wrote an account of this plot in their history of the king's reign. Soon after the plot to kill King Ahasuerus was uncovered, the king decided to promote a man called Haman to a very powerful position in his empire. Haman was very pleased. He was a descendant of King Agag of the Amalekites, a race that hated the Jews. Haman liked being important. Everywhere he went, he made sure people bowed to him. In the same way, people bow to worship a god. But one man refused to bow down when Haman paraded by. It was Mordecai. Do you know why? Mordecai was a Jew who obeyed the 10 Commandments given to Moses. God had commanded his people not to bow down and worship anyone or anything but him. When proud Haman saw that Mordecai the Jew refused to bow to him, he was very angry. Haman wanted to kill Mordecai, but then he thought, why not kill all the Jews? Haman came up with a wicked plan. He went to the king and said, "Your Majesty, there are some really bad people who live in your kingdom." The king was eager to know more. "All those bad people in your kingdom should be destroyed," said Haman. "I can arrange this for you and will put a lot of my own money towards it." The king agreed with Haman and gave him the money and servants to put his evil plan into action. A date was set for destruction of all the Jewish people living in Persia. A royal proclamation was made in all 127 provinces of Persia. On a certain day, all the Jewish men, women, and children were to be killed. When Mordecai heard about Haman's plans, he was very sad. He put on old scratchy clothes called sackcloth, worn by those who were mourning. Mordecai sat outside the gate of the king's palace and talked to other Jews about Haman and his evil plan. Soon Queen Esther heard about Haman's plan. She was a Jew, but the king did not know this. She sent a servant to Mordecai asking him for advice. Mordecai gave a copy of Haman's plan to her. "What can I do?" she asked. Mordecai told her if Haman had his way, she, her family, and all her Jewish friends would soon be dead. "But maybe," said Mordecai, "God has allowed you to become queen for a reason." All the Jews fasted and prayed to God for 3 days. Queen Esther decided to speak to the king, but the king had a rule that nobody was allowed to enter his throne room without permission. If anyone came into the throne room without permission and the king did not extend the royal scepter, they would be executed. Esther prepared her heart and bravely entered the throne room. When the king saw her, he extended his scepter. "What can I do for you?" the king asked. "Ask me anything you like." "I would like you to come to a feast," Esther replied, "and I would like to invite Haman too." The king liked the request, and so did Haman. In fact, Haman was so delighted, he went home to brag about it to his wife. On the way, he passed Mordecai, who still refused to bow to him. Now that made Haman really angry. When Haman got home, he boasted to his wife, "The queen herself has invited me to a feast with the king. Just me and the king and queen." Haman's wife was pleased. "I think you should build a gallows. Then tomorrow you can ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai." It was the night before the feast Esther had arranged for the king and Haman. Haman had ordered a gallows to be built to hang Mordecai. The king, however, could not sleep, so he asked a servant to read to him about the events of his reign. When the details of the plot that Mordecai had uncovered were read, he called for his servants. "Search the royal records and see if I ever thanked Mordecai." The servants reported that Mordecai had not been thanked. The next morning, Haman had hurried to see the king. This was his chance to ask that Mordecai to be hanged on his gallows. Before he could make his request, the king asked him a question. "How should I honor a man I want to reward?" the king asked. Thinking that the king wanted to honor him, Haman replied, "Dress him in a royal robe, put him on the king's horse, led by one of the most noble princes, and lead him through the city shouting, 'The king honors this man!'" "Good idea," replied the king. "Go and do all that for Mordecai." Haman silently fumed. He had to lead Mordecai, dressed in royal robes, on horseback, through the city shouting, "This is how the king honors this man." After that, Haman went home feeling humiliated and angry. But he still had the feast with the king and queen to look forward to. After eating some fine food at the feast, the king turned to Esther and asked if there was anything he could give her. "I have one request," said Esther. "I and my people are about to be destroyed by someone in your kingdom. We need protection." "Who would dare to kill you?" thundered the king. Esther pointed at Haman. Haman sank down in his chair. "Guards!" shouted the king. Haman collapsed at Esther's feet and clutched her, begging for mercy. When the king saw Haman's clutching at Esther's dress, he thought Haman was trying to attack her. "Seize that man!" he shouted. A guard grabbed Haman and dragged him away. One of the servants approached the king. "Your Majesty," he said, "Haman built a gallows and wanted to hang your friend Mordecai on it." The king immediately ordered that Haman be hanged on the gallows instead. Soon after that, Queen Esther asked the king if he could cancel the command for all the Jews to be destroyed. The king could not. It was a rule that the laws of the Medes and Persians could not be changed. "But," said the king, "I could make a new command. The Jews can defend themselves from anyone who attacks them." On the day when the Jews were supposed to be killed, anyone who tried met a well-armed team of Jews ready to fight back. All the Jews were saved. Haman was dead, and Mordecai was promoted to a high rank. God had answered their prayers in a most dramatic way. The story of Esther shows us how God uses people from all nations to carry out His plans and purposes. He answers prayer and rescues those who call out to Him for help. God may have put you in a position where you can serve Him.